A quick talk presentation in our program is a short presentation based specifically on practice, the design of learning activities or assessment tasks, the teaching and support of learning. There are 4 presentations within this session, and each has 10 minutes to present with 5 minutes for questions. I will warn each speaker when they're getting close to the end that it's nearly time to stop. I'll just put my hand up and that will tell you that I'm watching the time. And at 10 minutes, I'll stop you and we'll ask for questions. It is indeed a quick talk. This year, we're collecting feedback as we go. And so once we get started, I'll put the feedback link in. It's a form that looks like it's the same form for across the whole conference and the conference in the end. So we're just asking you to give us some feedback on sessions, on how you're responding to it, on how you see this as useful, and ideas that you might have for later conferences. Okay, let's begin. Our first presenter is today, Andrew Zelak, and I'm sorry, Andre, if I've called you by the wrong name. I'm just going to pass straight over to you to introduce. You should be able to share, and you can introduce your quick talk.
Okay, just give me a moment. Sorry, that's good. I'm just going to share screen soon.
You should be able to share screen.
Yeah, I'm just looking where my presentation is, that's all. Just give me a moment. Screen 2. It's going to...
there we are.
Yeah, just put it full screen. So thank you for the invitation to speak here and give a quick talk. I'm going to be speaking about problem-based learning and health services management. The context of this particular talk is the teaching of a subject called HML 404, Health Services and Their Internal Influences. And this was taught as a problem-based learning subject during semester 2, 2021. In essence, the content of the subject focused on internal communications in large health organisations and large organisations more broadly. And the subject was taught as part of the online postgraduate health management and leadership course at CSU. Importantly, this was a 4-point unit taught over 8 weeks. Also, interestingly, I suppose, problem-based learning, or PBL, hasn't been used widely in the education of health managers. It is something that has been used widely in clinical disciplines and is widely used within CSU and across CSU, but not for health management education. And I suppose just as the punchline, this subject, the teaching of this subject demonstrated the willingness of working health professionals with several years of clinical experience to engage with novel teaching techniques. And from the perspective of a lecturer, it was also fun to teach engaged students what could have otherwise been quite dry material. So just giving you a sense of the potential dryness, depending on your point of view of the material, these were the 6 topics in the subject. And I'm going to go on to talk about what we did that was different, that made this, in the experience of students, a little less dry. Before I do that, though, I want to talk briefly about the history of problem-based learning. For those of you outside of health disciplines, you may not be familiar with this. So PBL is generally regarded as having started in the mid-1960s at the McMaster University Medical School in Canada. And a common problem in medical education there was that first-year students had difficulty relating subjects like anatomy, biochemistry and physiology to their future work as medical professionals. And in short, PBL was introduced as a response to the teaching of discrete subjects, where students were given a complex problem to work on, and they would pick up histology and pathology and biochemistry and so on as part of that process of resolving that problem. And as I've suggested previously, PBL is widely used now in not just medical education, but also in allied health education and in veterinary courses at CSU. So how does all of this work in practice? It's, in essence, it's not like traditional lecture-based teaching. And in PBL, the student's learning is initiated, as I've suggested, by solving an ill-structured real-world problem. And this is relevant to health management education, primarily because these are the sort of problems that managers too face in the real world. Complex, ill-structured problems with only partial information. And again, the idea is that students will be more motivated when they can see the relevance of what they're learning to their work. And the PBL tutorial process, in essence, involves working in small groups to focus on students' reflection and reasoning, and with the tutor facilitating this process. So what do we do? Firstly, we started with encouragement to pursue innovative ideas in teaching. And thank you, John Ray from the School of Dentistry and Medical Sciences. He was very supportive in, I guess, encouraging the lecturers in the HML Health Management and Leadership course to experiment. And also Sid Parisi, who's also a lecturer in problem-based learning at the School of Dentistry and Medical Sciences. He's the resident expert at CSU in problem-based learning, and I met with him on several occasions and had a number of exchanges around how to approach the design of a problem-based learning course and also the assessment of a problem-based learning course. So what do we actually do in real life? We role-played around that issue of internal communications. I've suggested that the subject was essentially teaching internal communications in a large organisations. And in this role play, all students were health executives employed in a merged agency consisting of mental health, drug and alcohol, housing and correctional services, wrapped up in something called the Live Your Best Life agency. And all students were hired as senior executives on about $250,000 a year, plus a luxury car and housing allowance. And they all came with 10 years work as an experienced clinicians and health managers. And the new CEO was a former state MP and previous CEO of a multinational casino corporation, strong political connections and limited domain knowledge. And the lecturer played the role of the CEO and facilitated problem solving in weekly meetings online, or perhaps facilitated the creation of problems in weekly meetings online. An additional regular character was the student's former colleague and close friend who was concerned about the impact on her career as a result of changes brought about by the creation of the Living Your Best Life agency. And during the case, students examined both relevant and distracting information, theory, personal motivations and loyalties, all of which are very much the kind of material of working as a manager. So the fictional executive team at Living Your Best Life were working on a project called Sustainability in a Changed Climate, which aimed at developing and communicating the high-level direction for the new organisation. And this curiously coincided with the learning outcomes from the course and the modules of the course, which are looking at the structure, the mission, the vision objectives, values and priorities and organisational culture of the new organisation. And each week, the story unfolded in real time, broadly tracking the content of the learning modules. And the CEO gave what I call a pep talk each week, which is recorded followed by a Q&A session, bearing in mind this is an online course. And while students attended the live sessions each week, many students couldn't either because they were living in another country or work commitments prevented them from doing so. In addition, there were 2-week work style emails from the CEO each week asking executives to solve a specific poorly structured dilemma facing the organisation and related to the module content. There weren't any lectures as such. All content was delivered via a flipped model. As I suggested, all students were online and asynchronous, or many were asynchronous. And in response to the asynchronous and online nature, rather than a discussion board, students were required to communicate with each other and the CEO using emails, which is a fairly natural thing to be doing in a work environment in any case. Just finally, there weren't any essay assessments. There was a Pecha Kucha YouTube presentation they were required to record, which I'm hoping most of you are familiar with. The work emails were also assessed, and they were required to reflect upon the process of participating in the role play. Some challenges with doing problem-based learning online. This was delivered during the 2021 COVID pandemic. All of the students that I suggested were clinicians and health managers, and I think they're already stressed by the reality of their day-to-day lives. So this is an additional challenge. Which also meant that students didn't always have the time or energy to respond in a timely fashion. Sorry, Denise.
Sorry, just saying you've just got about 3 minutes left.
Yep, that's okay. And the asynchronous content online. So the other consideration was there were only 8 students in the class. What do students make of PBL? How familiar were you with PBL? Basically, no one was familiar with PBL. One person sort of heard of it. That's about it. How likely would you be to recommend to your colleagues taking a PBL subject in the future? Most students thought it was pretty good. The one student absolutely hated it. He considered that he wasn't paying good money to have to read things, which was an unusual thing for a student to be saying, but I suppose it takes all kinds. How useful was it for living the best life case study for covering the content in the subject? Again, most students thought it was quite good. How useful were the teaching materials for your career? Apart from the student who didn't like anything about the course, all the other students who responded to the survey thought it was pretty good. Additional comments from students, just very quickly. Very creative was one comment. The Pecha Kucha forced students to distill a message. It made them much more aware of communications. Again, apart from the student who thought everything was negative, another student thought it was very useful. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Andre. Are there any questions now? It's always interesting that. Sorry, no, you go, Louise. I was just filling in.
I went to a meeting the other day where everyone talked over each other in Zoom, and it was great. We're so polite. Andre, I really found that interesting. I've been curious about PBL for a while. I'm in information studies, and my colleague Casey's here, and she's just telling me how this is common in schools. I'm really intrigued on the effort to create the scenario for you as a lecturer. What kind of prep time would you be looking at? So if I was to explore, because we use a lot of case studies, yes, but we don't embed them in the way that you've just described through the whole learning. And I can see how that could be super beneficial for my students. But I'm just curious about the load for you to actually come up with that, and how much you've had to refine it over time.
So we've delivered this, starting at the last question first. It's been delivered twice now, and the assessments are being changed slightly, and that's been a general directive to reduce the number of assessments. So we took the reflections out, which I think, it was designed with the reflection component in there, but such is the way of the world. We have to kind of respond to these directives. In terms of the development time, I think it is an extra load, but probably an extra 20 to 30% load to develop the case, and because a lot of it's responding to real world events as well, because you have to develop the content as you would with a regular course. The way it appears on Interact 2 is pretty much like a normal course. It doesn't look particularly different if you were to go to the website or anything. It's really the delivery that is different, and it does take a little bit of extra time. And I think, certainly in my experience, playing a slightly caricatured character, a larger than life character, made it more entertaining, but also more engaging for students. And it is actually fun to do that. You're allowed to have some fun as well, I might point out. And so while it does take a bit of extra time, it's not unfun time, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I'd say probably 20% extra time to maintain a coherent narrative and a coherent scenario, because it's not just a matter of delivering blobs of content each week, as I'm sure none of you do, but it is possible to do, and some have done in teaching. It is a matter of kind of maintaining a coherent narrative, but that I think also is engaging, and particularly in the shorter courses. This one was an 8-week course. That's again easier, but I'm sure you're all experienced that mid-course dip at around about week 8 in longer courses, where students just sort of stop coming, particularly for online courses.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was a really interesting answer as well, Andre. There's a couple of questions in the chat that you might want to either look at while we're listening, or I will send them out to people afterwards because we're pretty short on time. If you can just unshare your desktop, Andre, and then we'll move on to our second presentation. And it's a presentation with Mark Frost, Emmett Berry, and Ye Rui and Lai Ji. I will hand it over to you, and I'm looking forward to learning about the knowns and unknowns of teaching into China. Thanks, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Emmett Berry here from the School of Business. Just checking, you can see my screen, which is the PowerPoint right now. Yep. Thanks, Denise. So yeah, presenting today, we've got Mark, also the School of Business, and we also have Yao and Vivian, who are joining us from China. And thank you so much for your time and coming along today. So what we're going to talk about very briefly in our 10 minutes is discuss the core structure, teaching into the China program, some of the challenges and opportunities that are presented, what each of our responsibilities are, and how we went with this new initiative we introduced this year. So just to give you some background and set the scene, Charles Sturt University has a 20+ year joint cooperative program with 4 Chinese universities. And JUFI, which is the one I'm hovering over now, is located to the north of China, up at Changchun, about there, and you can see that on the map. So we teach a Bachelor of Business program, and concurrent to that, students are also doing a degree in there at the university in, say, accounting, finance, management, concurrent to the CSU Bachelor of Business. Traditionally, the first and second year subjects are taught by our partner, and the third year CSU lecturers would come to China and teach those final 8, as we called them. However, with COVID and all this disruption, there's been a few changes we sort of had to make to accommodate for that. So look, some of the challenges is obviously the distance, different sort of teaching sessions. We're trying to align with another university's teaching sessions. We've got 2 regulatory agencies to deal with, not just TEXA in Australia, but also the Ministry of Education, both state and national in China. So generally we have a more regimented assessment structure, and the students are obviously learning English as a second language, and we need to support them through that. And for this particular, what we're discussing today, first year students is a new initiative that we're trialed this year with the JUFI University. So I'll talk more about that in a moment, but just to give you an idea of what, say, Mark and I's responsibilities were, and then Yao and Vivian's responsibilities were, we would, for the first year subjects, we would teach each week online. We'd do online teaching, and that would be, Mark would be teaching on certain days, I would be teaching on certain days. We would do the moderation of the assignment, we would mark the exam, and we'd be, as the conveners as well, preparing the assessments and managing the Interact 2 site. Vivian and Yao and other staff in China would also be doing face-to-face teaching. They'd be marking the assignments. They'd be helping us with feedback and being more, able to consult with the students directly, and as well. So from about this time last year, we've now gone through the year now. CSU would also teach the first year subjects with the local university's support. However, one of the disrupting things that suddenly happened, not only did we need to teach in online mode since 2020, the students, there was an outbreak in China, and the lockdowns were initiated 3 weeks into our teaching session. So into the 2022 there. So So we had that added challenge as well, where students were confined to their dormitories and they weren't so much having face-to-face classes as well. So anyway, now we're going to go through, each of us are just going to give our perspective on the challenges and opportunities that presented to us throughout the session. So very quickly, I found, particularly with, I would teach AC 100, which is Accounting 100, an introductory accounting subject, and I worked with Yo, and Mark taught MGT 100, a management subject, and was working closely with Vivian. So I found for my particular subject, there was an added challenge in, yes, you've been learning English for a while, but here's another level of complexity. We're asking you to learn the business words of the English language. And unfortunately with the English language, 5 words, the one word can have 5 different meanings. And so getting the students to complete a memo on a business memo, and analyzing financial information, they found it challenging, which I understand. And I also found that when we're having our Zoom meetings, it all of a sudden changed where students were in their dormitories a lot more. That was the background behind. So they were confined there, and I think classes stopped, so it was harder for them as well to seek face-to-face support. There was also the added complexity. I used an assignment that required Excel and Word, and there was quite a few steps in that. And then the lecturers as well had to get used to the new formatting of the way I was marking. So that was another challenge as well. So look, I'll jump across now, and Mark, if you wanted to tell us about your MGT 100 experience.
Thanks, Emmett. And just to clarify for everyone, before this time last year, CSU used to teach only the final 8 subjects, and the first 16 were taught by the partners, with CSU moderating the assessments and marking the exams and setting the exams, etc. Now we teach 16 of the 24 subjects. Just some challenges from me for MGT 100, which is the introduction to management, subject management principles, and organizational theory. A lot of what Emmett had, but also there were 487 students in the cohort. So we were basically teaching a Zoom meeting to potentially 487 students. Silly me made a simple error first up, setting up the Zoom meetings, didn't allow automatic login, so I'd soon change that for the second week. But yeah, it's sort of some housekeeping, had to get special permission to break the normal cap in a Zoom meeting of 300 students as well. So basically 487 students. Vivian was great to work with, but she's one of a team of 3 that were teaching this subject in Changchun. The students are not as experienced as Australian students, and what I mean by that was they don't have working in McDonald's or working in Coles or whatever. So when you're trying to relate some of the management, communication, leadership, basic, you sort of, it was sort of hard. So, and culturally, just the English language did slow everyone, did slow down. Also the compressed nature, 8 weeks, not 12 weeks. So effectively each week we were doing 1.5 topics. I'll hand over now to Vivian. Vivian, your turn.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Barry. And this is the first time to present online. And my name is, Chinese name is Li Ge. The pronunciation is so difficult for all of you. I will share my opinion about challenges and opportunities teaching online. First of all, I think teaching operation is very challenging, because there is no enough time for us. Now, there are 3 of Jufi lectures teach together with CSU lectures. There is no enough time before we start to teach. Discussion and communication opportunity is not enough. Teaching schedule has already been set when lectures start to discuss the cooperative teaching mode. Even though we got some good idea, it is impossible for us to change something. Secondly, participation is more important than attendance. Actually, when I attend the online class of Mark, I noticed the attendance is not satisfying, is not good enough. I know the reason is that the compressing course is too difficult for the students, and especially all taught in English. And even for Chinese, the compressing teaching is so boring, I think. And there is one thing, our Juvi lectures just teach face-to-face on campus for 1 week. Because of COVID-19, we changed to teach online at the same time. And the last one, I got one solution that interaction teaching method is good choice. So I try to use some of Chinese apps. I'm sure you can got this kind of apps in Australian to increase the initiative students for online teaching, because this kind of app can record their performance and set aside values for this. May I share my screen? So I will show some pictures of the records of the students.
Actually, Vivian, I think we're pretty tight for time, so
okay.
we might move on. Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank
We're
you,
happy
everyone.
to chat to you later about it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, final, yeah. If you could. Oh, hello. There we go. We can hear now.
Yeah, thank you. This is the first teaching as local lecture. I think for student, it's difficult to learn a lot of accounting theory and application in several weeks for student. And for lectures, there are so many works to do for so much learning and teaching, such as taking part in the course of CSU lecture to get the key point of ACC 1, 0, and 0, and the assignment requirement, providing my course with student, making within required several days. And I think more detailed requirement provided for students and lectures will be well. And for student, another difficult maybe come from lack of time, and English is not a native language. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So look, just to wrap up now in 30 seconds. This is the literature that I reviewed, and there's quite a bit of literature out there about looking at teaching first-year Chinese students, and we're going to explore that a bit further. Student outcomes. Look, we now have a lot of feedback from students, and this is great, getting Vivian and Yao's feedback on teaching the session. And I think now wrapping this up, we can do a more targeted survey next year. And now with this 1 year's worth of information, we're going to we can have more chats with Vivian and everyone else, and then look at ways that we can further improve it, because it was a big thing teaching first year students for the first time. And there's a lot to reflect on and ways we can improve it for 2023. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Mark, Emmett, Vivian, and Yao. There's a lot more to talk about, isn't there, in that space? And a quick talk doesn't give us enough time. But thank you for sharing your experience. And we will look forward to next year hearing how it's gone in its next iteration. I'm going to jump straight now to Louise Curran, and she's going to present to us on her meeting students face-to-face, a reflection on interactive orals. So Louise, we look forward to learning from you now.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So lots of interesting things, Mark and team before us. In our school, we teach students in Hong Kong, so definitely keen to follow up with you. I just want to start with a very brief acknowledgement of country. I'm here on the Ngunnawal, on the lands of the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra, and I just pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are with us in this call, and also to elders past, present and emerging across Australia and the footprint of the Charles Sturt campuses across Biripi, Gundungurra and Wiradjuri country. So I am really excited to share with you some short, brief points about my experience introducing an interactive oral assessment. I'm sure most of you tuned in yesterday to Phil's talk that began our EdX, and Phil's tier had interactive orals really high at the top, if you remember, and he put them there. He made a few interesting comments about them. I know that Amita Krautlower, who's here with us today, is going to give a talk at 12:15 that will go into lots of depth about interactive orals. Here's the link for Amita's session in just an hour's time. So what I want to do is just share with you exactly like how I did this, what I got out of it, how it worked for me. I know that Amita will probably share this with you, but not all of you may attend this next session of hers. Phil mentioned yesterday that interactive orals, the home for interactive orals in Australia is really at Griffith Uni. And Amita will tell you that story in more detail. So Griffith has spent more than 7 years through their business school. They introduced this process of interactive orals, and they have developed this awesome resource. So take a look at that Sway link if you want to kind of just get an overview at a glance. So there's a few things that Phil said yesterday that I know those of us who know something about interactive orals were sort of going, hang on, Phil, that's a bit sideways. So one of them was he gave the impression this is not a suitable form of assessment for a big group of students. The Griffith people are really, really clear that this is totally achievable with classes that have more than 100 students. My class was small. I had 20. Mine were postgrads. They conform really quite closely to the Charles Sturt students at a glance. Their key feature is they're time poor. There's quite a lot of first and family learners in our cohort. We're a completely online course, and we have been since the 70s. Charles Sturt's library schools is one of the true feathers in its cap, and you should tell everyone in the uni how great the library school is, and how old it is and its excellent credentials. So I teach in the archives and records subjects, which are a fairly new add-on for the school. Those areas are really hard for students to grapple. They've come through a library introduction. They then have to deal with the much more kind of robust world of information management around record keeping stuff so that it can behave as evidence. That's quite a shock for them. They have to grasp a bunch of new concepts quickly. I got excited about the interactive oral for two reasons. The first was because it ranks high for academic integrity credentials. I had a problem with my first assessment in my subject. Turnitin showed me you could buy it on a site called TV Assessment Help. So I realized I really had to do something about this. So I have the good fortune to be here in Canberra with some really engaged fellow teachers, amongst them Deborah Sheila and Kelly Jackson. And I attend Deborah's Teaching Creatively community of practice, which I really commend to you if you're not aware of that. And through that, I met the interactive orals. I then was introduced to Amita's community of practice about interactive orals at Charles Sturt. So those are two things, if you're interested in this, really take note of that community of practice, because that was how I learnt what I needed to know to introduce this. So I said there was two reasons I wanted to introduce it. One was about academic integrity. The other was because I'm conscious that post-COVID, my students want more face-to-face contact. We may be distance education experts with, 50 years experience in our school, but the truth of the matter is that post-COVID, the students at least want me to show them that I'm available to them for face-to-face contact. So the interactive oral really appealed to me in that regard. That brings up another thing from Phil's comment that was sort of needs correction, which was he implied that there's a link to the Viva. The interactive oral is actually quite different from a Viva because it is a conversation. It is intended to be a dialogic exchange. It's not a question-answer format. And part of my professional growth room to improve areas is around doing that aspect of the dialogue more effectively. So what these slides, just briefly introducing my students and my subject and why I chose it. The other key point with my subject is it's a master's degree elective. So it felt appropriate to introduce something that brings in some ambiguity for these students. So what did I kind of get out of this? I did one thing that was slightly, I'm not sure how successfully it's worked, which is I chose to do it as a first assessment. And I did that because for pragmatic reasons. I also did it because one of the major benefits was because I got to have a talk with the students. So that was responding to that face-to-face initiative. And you'll see here in my third dot point, I got to know the cohort better. That was one of the massive advantages to doing this. That has improved my teaching with that cohort in a number of relatively subtle ways. Obviously, it's allowed me to plug gaps in their knowledge. I get to know what they don't know. It's really helped me understand better what is going on for my students on study access plans, what their issues actually are as learners. That has been super beneficial. And there's other subtle aspects to the ways that it's informed my teaching, like just the way I am prioritizing my information. It's hard to pinpoint. I'll have to think more deeply about exactly how that would be a good one to quantify. And Amita may know of research that really looks into that more closely. The other key point I want to make from here is that for me as a teacher, this has developed my teaching practice a lot, because as the person running the interactive oral or engaged in this conversation, I'm also under examination because I'm seeing how effectively my teaching has communicated. So I have found that both slightly terrifying, but incredibly useful to identify what ways I'm not connecting, which points are getting buried in my communication. I also adopted a co-marking process. I'll talk about that in just a moment. And that was great for deepening engagement with industry. Ours are accredited courses. Those industry relationships are really important. So downsides, there's some complexity. I'd say that Andre's analysis of it being about 20 to 30% work to set up. From my experience, that's probably the 20% is about right. So Denise, you're going to tell me I have to stop in a moment. Yep. So the tech challenges, some tech challenges, complexity and prep for the markers. So there was work to do around moderation and prepping the teachers. So concretely, how did we do it? Expert advice, I've talked about that. Building capacity in my school. My associate head of school in charge of teaching and learning was very supportive. That was a key factor for me. My moderator for my subject was also really cheering for me and happy to work with me to work out a moderation process as we introduced this. Prep with the students, Amita will talk about that in more detail. There's work that needs to happen to reassure and build trust with the students. Then there's process things. The most important one I want to share with you is that I chose to do a double-blind marking process. So I had a sessional marker. We both sat in on the sessions. We both played a role. We then had a cone of silence where we both marked the students and then swapped notes to arrive at our final mark. I found that process high in integrity, really useful for us in developing our teaching, how to actually do this and delivering a good outcome for students. How did we go on the data? Mixed. We got some absolute cheers. We didn't get any complete zeros. 3 was the lowest rating. Most people didn't comment on it, but some people, we got 2 comments, one quite comprehensive about least helpful for learning. So yeah, that's that'll do. That sounds like I'm out of time. So thanks for the chance to share this. It's been a really interesting process, and I'd really like to share my knowledge with others who want to introduce this.
Thank you, Louise. And I think it is really interesting to think of it as an introductory sort of assessment within the subject. I can connect with that a lot, but it's a good way to think about it. Alan, we do have time at the moment for a question, or were you just applauding?
I was applauding. I thought that was very good. Thank you.
Oh, great, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. It was a very reflective presentation too, which is always interesting to hear someone thinking back over what they've done.
Yeah, I think the key point is the moderation process. The key point is most people do these interactive orals on their own. And I think I could now, with the confidence I've had from doing it with someone else, I could do that as a single marker. Could I get my sessional to do it? Others do successfully in the interactive orals COP. There are other people who have managed to enlist sessionals to do this. My sessional was very nervous to do this on her own. I asked her if she would, and she really wanted to do this as a team. I think that as the team's capability matures, this could work really well. One of my questions is, in our school, we don't own subjects. A sessional will undoubtedly inherit this subject at some time. How's that going to run? I'm hoping the university develops its capacity so that we can train each other, so sessionals can have an opportunity to learn about this as an assessment method and learn what they need to do to prepare for it. Because I think the benefits for students, for everyone, are quite high.
Excellent. Thank you, Louise. There's a lot to think about there, certainly. And that brings us now to our final presentation. These have been really interesting presentations across a whole lot of different ways of teaching. Michael Barron is going to present to us on his hybrid delivery mode. Welcome, Michael, and we're waiting with bated breath to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Denise. I really appreciate having me over. So just a bit of background. The past semester has been my first semester where I put on subject coordinator hat and working directly for CSU, but I've been working with CSU partners study group for over 15 years. So when Louise mentioned the owning the subject issue, the idea is really resonating with me, because for many years I had difficulty in establishing to what extent, if any, I can claim subject ownership as far as making changes and subject development is concerned. And now the ball is in my court, so I'm able to make a more visible difference. So I'd like to very briefly share my experience in managing hybrid assessments. And of course, the hybrid model involves delivering to students in the classroom who are physically present, as well as those who are joining the class online. And I always liked the idea of trying it out at a large university like CSU. And of course, since every crisis is an opportunity, thanks to COVID, it became possible. So we ended up in a situation where, because of COVID, some campuses were in the lockdown, other campuses were operating in traditional mode. And then when COVID got over, it turned out the study group started closing down its campuses. So there was yet another reason to continue in the hybrid mode. So while based in Melbourne, I could service students in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. Not to mention that many of the students, of course, by the time have not been based on campus. So while they were supposed to be in Melbourne, they were not yet. Of course, they were very keen to attend classes. So just very briefly outlining some of the challenges in implementing the hybrid model. The first one, it's good to plan. I come from project management background, so I always see planning as a key, but the hybrid environment was clearly not planned for. I think we all remember how it was. We're going to work and suddenly we get an announcement that from next day onwards, we are going to work from home, teach from home. The entire scene is going to change. The second challenge is that neither classroom-based nor online assessments turned out initially to be a perfect fit because they were not designed for this purpose. They were designed to service specific cohorts, specific student groups. And then, of course, lack of trust and initial confusion at all levels. Moderators, tutors, lecturers, last but not least, students, of course. Validity, when we place the assessment online, are we sure that students are going to do it all by themselves? How can we validate their assessments beyond exams, such as little tests, for instance? And management challenges, getting technology organized, both from student end and of course from the campus end, because campuses had to provide certain facilities to lecturers and to students who wanted to do it on campus, but were placed remotely from the lecturer. And this is the paradox that I encountered. You would think that teaching IT subjects, I'm supposed to have less challenges translating assessments into hybrid mode than my colleagues in other faculties, which are not so familiar to using technologies, where students are not so comfortable with online assessments, presumably. Well, it was not the case. I think many of the technical assessments proved to be particularly difficult to translate into hybrid format because they were relying on very specific applications of technology. And in the hybrid mode, it was not possible. For instance, for one of the subjects, there was an online test, which was supposed to replace the classroom test. And the idea was that all the marking, both by myself and by the tutors, had to be done while in class. So within a 1 hour session, one person had to mark 25 online test submissions while online. And marking was meant to be done through consultations with the student. So you can imagine how faulty the original idea was, quickly opening room for the students to enter one by one, and then servicing 25 of them within 1 hour, providing them with a valid mark that is arguably going to be reliable and consistent with the subject outline. So obviously it was not executable. So one thing I realized as a result of this journey is that one, it's really important that we tailor those assessments to specific subjects and outcomes. It's really critical that we don't just say, this is how we do it. This is how we translate our subjects into hybrid mode and deliver assessments, because it's just not going to work. Those kind of directives at high level, they may appear to be very lucrative because it's always good to unify the way things are done, but I don't think it's going to be practical. And of course, try to engage everybody into the subject design, the tutors, the lecturers, those who are teaching face-to-face, those who are running online tutorials, because we need to understand different perspectives, first-hand perspectives. And this is where I started experimenting a little bit with my subjects, because being a subject coordinator, I could finally experiment to a greater extent. So it's good to feel in charge. And I started experimenting with designing a range of assessments that address the same learning outcomes that are equally valid. So one advantage of this approach turned out to be that students have been able to select assessment mode that was best suitable to their situation. And also, what made it easier for me to work on design of the solutions, I was teaching 2 separate cohorts at the same time. The study group cohort, which is international students, which were both face-to-face and online, and a CSU own class, which is technically speaking based in Wagga Wagga, even though I haven't been to Wagga Wagga for years. And I've been able to look at very different perspectives. And it's interesting how, when provided with a range of assessment options, students have to make up their mind which one suits them best. And you can see which ones they're leaning towards, and you can see which ones are working and which ones are not. So I found the experience truly effective and rewarding. The downside is that the last thing we always want to do is to use current students as guinea pigs. But unfortunately, when you are running something for the first time, it has to be experimental to some extent. Thanks, Denise. And
you've got a minute or so left, Michael.
Yes. So thank you so much. And if there are any further questions or invitations to discuss, I'm always delighted to hear about others' experiences, because learning from others, I think, is really essential for those like me who are trying to design something new. So this is me, and always looking forward to learning what others are doing, because this is the only way to go forward. Thank you.
Michael, thank you. You're right about that sort of how do we not have guinea pigs, but how do we change if we don't sort of recognize that some students are going to experience something when we're still trying to work out what it feels like. That was really interesting, the way you've addressed a crisis and thought about what are the different options that you can have. Are there any questions? Perhaps we're all nearly ready for lunch now and a bit sort of brain fogged. Thank you, all four of you, for your presentations. It's been an interesting journey through a number of different ways of how we look at teaching and how we try to innovate to address our student needs, to help us manage in difficult situations, and to think about bringing to our students different experiences that motivate them and create that curiosity and that connectedness that mean they're learning within a community they're not having to struggle through on their own. It's been a great session, and I'm very grateful that the four of you were able to bring something to us. Though the recordings will be up on the website so that you can go back and have a look at them again if you like. And I know these quick talks are very quick, but it gives us a taste of what we can do. Please go to the link in the chat and fill out the feedback form. It can be used for just one session or for a number of sessions. And I'll say goodbye to you now and thank you again. And we have one more session today, and then we'll see you again in the morning at the panel session. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Denise.
Thank you, Louise. That was good.
Super interesting session.
Yeah, great one.
Vivian
Thanks.
gone? She has. Bye, Vivian. Yeah, it was really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, see you.
Bye.